The morning alarm echoed through the massive training facility on Titan Prime, where cadets from 17 different species prepared for the most challenging test in the galaxy. Tom rubbed his eyes and looked around the dormitory he shared with his 4 human teammates. Anna was already awake, sketching diagrams on her tablet while Lucy stretched and yawned loudly. Ben sat on his bunk, staring at the ceiling with that expression he got when his brain was working overtime. David emerged from the washroom, still dripping water and grinning like he always did before something exciting happened. The Galactic Defense Academy had trained military officers for 300 years, ever since the first Howler invasion. Nearly destroyed civilized space. These savage creatures appeared without warning, piloting massive dreadnoughts that could crack planets like eggs. Every species in the galaxy had lost worlds to their brutal attacks, and the Academy existed to make sure it never happened again. Today marked the final examination, a test that separated future commanders from ordinary soldiers. Each team had 72 hours to build a weapon capable of stopping a Howler dreadnought using only standard Academy materials. The challenge had broken the spirits of countless cadets over the centuries, but those who succeeded became legends. Commander Thane walked through the preparation area, his crystalline body reflecting the harsh overhead lights. The Vorthan officer had overseen this examination for 40 years, watching teams struggle with the impossible task. His own species had created the Academy's most devastating weapon, the photon lance, but it had taken their greatest minds 47 years to perfect. The insectoid krill had needed 32 years to develop their swarm cannons, while the aquatic nereid had spent 51 years perfecting their tsunami generators. The 5 humans gathered their gear and headed toward the testing facility. They had been at the Academy for only 18 months, representing a species that had just discovered faster-than-light travel. Most instructors considered their presence a political gesture rather than a serious attempt at military training. Humans used primitive chemical rockets and crude nuclear weapons, technology that seemed laughably outdated compared to the sophisticated energy manipulation and exotic matter engineering of established civilizations. The testing facility stretched across several acres underground, filled with components that represented millennia of technological advancement. Fusion reactors hummed quietly in their containment fields, while gravity manipulators sat ready to bend space itself. Quantum processors waited to calculate trajectories across multiple dimensions, and dark matter containers held the universe's most mysterious substance. Advanced civilizations had spent centuries developing each piece of equipment, and now cadets were expected to combine them into something that could save the galaxy. Other teams were already examining the available materials with careful precision. The Vorthan cadets measured each component with scientific instruments, recording detailed specifications in their crystalline memory matrices. The Krill Collective communicated through their hive mind, sharing calculations and theories instantaneously. The Nereid team moved with fluid grace, their aquatic suits allowing them to work in the facility's atmosphere while their minds processed information at incredible speeds. The humans approached their assigned workspace and immediately began talking. Not quietly conferring like the other teams, but actual loud conversation filled with interruptions and sudden changes of direction. Tom picked up a fusion reactor and turned it over in his hands like he was examining a broken appliance. Anna started sketching wildly on her tablet, erasing and redrawing with manic energy. Ben wandered around touching random components while muttering calculations under his breath. Lucy began sorting materials into piles that made no apparent sense, and David found the facility's food dispensers and began making coffee for everyone. Commander Thane observed this chaos with growing bewilderment. Every successful team in Academy history had begun with careful planning, detailed blueprints, and mathematical modeling. The humans seemed to be approaching the challenge like they were planning a party rather than designing a weapon of mass destruction. They had no apparent strategy, no careful measurements, and no regard for established safety protocols. What if we combine the gravity well with the fusion bottle? Tom suggested, his hands already reaching for components before anyone answered. That's completely insane, Anna replied, but she was already calculating something on her tablet. The Containment field would collapse in seconds and probably take half the facility with it. Unless we invert the polarity and route the excess energy through a secondary system, Ben added, dragging over a dark matter injector that weighed more than he did. Lucy, can you figure out how to jury-rig a feedback loop? Probably, Lucy said, examining a quantum processor with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. David, we're going to need more coffee. This is going to take a while. The other teams paused their work to stare at the humans. Never in Academy history had anyone suggested combining a gravity well with a fusion reactor. The energy requirements alone would be astronomical, and the risk of catastrophic failure was nearly guaranteed. Yet the humans were already moving. Components around like they actually intended to try it. Commander Thane approached their workspace, his crystalline features reflecting concern and curiosity in equal measure. Cadets, perhaps you should begin with a more conventional approach. The gravity manipulation systems require extensive calibration before they can be safely integrated with fusion technology. Tom looked up from the reactor he was examining and grinned. Thanks for the advice, sir, but we think we can make this work. We just need to convince the gravity well to play nice with the fusion containment field. You cannot simply convince fundamental forces of physics to behave differently, Thane replied, his voice carrying the patience of someone who had explained basic science to countless students. Maybe not convince, Anna said, not looking up from her increasingly complex diagrams. But we might be able to trick them for a few seconds. That's all we really need. The Vorthan commander stared at the human cadets, trying to understand their logic. In 3 centuries of academy training, no team had ever attempted to trick physics into working differently. They studied it, mastered it, and applied it with precise mathematical certainty. The idea that fundamental forces might be negotiable was completely alien to every species except, apparently, humans. As the first day progressed, the humans continued their chaotic approach while other teams made steady, methodical progress. The examination had begun, and 72 hours would determine who had what it took to defend the galaxy. Steam rose from David's coffee cup as he watched his teammates work with the focused intensity of people who had completely lost their minds. 24 hours into the examination, while other teams carefully consulted technical manuals and ran safety simulations, the humans had somehow convinced 3 fusion reactors to work in parallel. According to every textbook in the Academy, this should have been impossible. According to the humans, impossible just meant no one had been creative enough yet. Lucy hung upside down inside what appeared to be a massive metallic ring, welding components together with a plasma torch that cast dancing shadows across the facility walls. Her voice echoed from inside the growing machine as she called out instructions to her teammates. David, hold this steady while I reroute the plasma conduit through the secondary manifold. Are you absolutely certain this won't explode and vaporize half the facility? David asked, gripping a component that vibrated ominously and glowed with an alarming purple light that hurt to look at directly. Probably not, Ben replied from somewhere deep in the machine's interior, his voice muffled by layers of jury-rigged equipment. Anna, try the ignition sequence and see what happens. The device suddenly hummed with a low harmonic frequency that made everyone in the facility pause their work. The sounds seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the floor and walls like the facility itself was singing. Other teams stopped their careful calculations to stare at the human contraption, which looked nothing like a proper weapon and everything like an industrial accident that had achieved consciousness. The Vorthan team had spent their entire first day creating detailed blueprints using advanced mathematical modeling. Their weapon design was elegant and precise, incorporating centuries of crystalline energy focusing techniques that could channel the power of stars into devastating beams. Every component was perfectly calculated, every connection verified through multiple safety protocols. The Krill Collective had debated optimal configurations through their hive mind, sharing thoughts and theories instantaneously across their group consciousness. Their weapon resembled a perfect geometric sculpture, with thousands of micro-projectiles guided by quantum entanglement principles that would overwhelm any target through sheer coordinated firepower. The Nereid team worked with fluid precision, their aquatic minds processing multiple calculation streams simultaneously. Their pressure wave generator could manipulate water molecules at the subatomic level, creating crushing forces that would implode enemy vessels from the inside out. All of these weapons represented masterpieces of engineering that would have been celebrated achievements for their respective civilizations. The humans had built something that defied classification and possibly several fundamental laws of physics. Commander Thane approached the human workspace again, drawn by the increasingly impossible sounds emanating from their machine. Cables snaked everywhere like mechanical vines, connecting components that had never been designed to work together. Somewhere in the chaos, that coffee maker David had discovered was now somehow integrated into what appeared to be the targeting system. "Cadets," Thane said, his crystalline voice carrying a mixture of fascination and horror. "What exactly are you attempting to construct?" Tom emerged from beneath the machine, covered in grease and coolant, his uniform torn but his grin intact. "We're not entirely sure yet, sir, but we think we can create a localized space-time distortion that'll fold a Howler dreadnought inside out like origami." Thane's crystalline structure actually flickered, his species equivalent of a double-take. "That's theoretically impossible. The energy requirements alone would exceed the output of most stars, and the gravitational stresses would tear apart everything within several light-years." "Yeah, we figured that out pretty quickly," Anna interrupted, not looking up from her tablet where equations covered every available pixel of screen space. "So we're borrowing energy from adjacent parallel dimensions, just tiny amounts. They probably won't even notice we took it." The Vorthan commander felt something that his species rarely experienced: complete bewilderment. "You're attempting to breach dimensional barriers with Academy training equipment?" "Sort of," Ben called out, his voice echoing from inside the machine. "More like we're creating a really aggressive doorbell that knocks reality off its hinges. For a few microseconds, then we slam the door shut before anything bad happens." The Nereid representative approached with fluid grace, her aquatic suit allowing her to communicate in the facility's atmosphere. Her voice carried the wisdom of a species that had mastered oceanic physics across a dozen worlds. "Young humans, dimensional manipulation requires centuries of study and understanding. Our greatest scientists have spent lifetimes just theorizing about such applications without ever attempting practical implementation." Lucy emerged from inside the machine, covered in some kind of luminescent coolant that made her glow softly in the facility's lighting. "Yeah, but we're not trying to understand it perfectly or create an elegant solution. We just need it to work once, really well, for about 3 seconds. After that, it can break down completely for all we care." The other teams had completely abandoned their own work to watch the humans. Never in Academy history had anyone attempted to build a weapon without first understanding exactly how it would function. The concept of creating something that worked through controlled chaos rather than precise engineering was revolutionary and terrifying in equal measure. "The dimensional breach mechanism is showing promising energy readings," Ben announced, reading measurements from an instrument panel that looked like it had been assembled by someone who had never seen proper instrumentation before. "We're getting stable resonance frequencies across multiple probability matrices." "That sentence doesn't make sense," the Krill representative buzzed through their translator. "Probability matrices cannot generate resonance frequencies because they exist in theoretical space rather than physical reality." "Tell that to our machine," Anna said, pointing to her tablet where impossible readings scrolled past faster than most beings could process. "It seems to be working anyway." Commander Thane had given up trying to understand the human approach and was now simply documenting safety violations for his report. The list had grown to 47 pages, and he had been forced to invent 3 new categories of regulatory breaches. His superiors would never believe what he was witnessing without extensive documentation. The machine suddenly emitted a harmonious chime, and several components began glowing with warm, almost friendly light. The chaotic energy patterns that had been making reality uncomfortable seemed to settle into something resembling order, though an order that followed rules nobody else recognized. Oh, Lucy said, staring at her readings with wide eyes. That does actually working better than we expected. We might not die horribly after all. The machine had grown into something that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously while making reality nervous about its life choices. Anna wiped sweat from her forehead as she stared at the readings that should have been impossible, but were somehow becoming more stable by the hour. 30 hours into the examination, the human contraption incorporated 17 different energy sources, included David's coffee maker as a critical component of the targeting system, and emitted sounds that made the fabric of space-time seem slightly uncomfortable. Ben crawled out from the machine's interior, his uniform torn and his hair standing at odd angles from exposure to exotic energy fields. The dimensional breach mechanism is definitely doing something interesting, he announced, consulting readings from instruments that looked like they had been designed by committee and built during an earthquake. I'm not sure what, but the quantum resonance patterns are maintaining stability across multiple probability cascades. Lucy emerged from a maintenance hatch that hadn't existed 5 minutes earlier, carrying tools that were glowing with their own internal light. The gravity manipulation system is responding to our modifications, though it's bending space in ways that make my eyes hurt to look at directly. I think we accidentally created a pocket of space where physics works differently than everywhere else. Tom stood back and admired their creation with the satisfaction of someone who had built something magnificent without understanding exactly what it was. The machine defied every principle of engineering aesthetics, looking more like a modern art installation created by someone who had never seen art and wasn't entirely sure what modern meant. Components were connected by cables that took impossible paths through space, and several sections appeared to be held together by determination and carefully applied wishful thinking the other teams had made. Impressive progress using conventional approaches that actually made sense. The Vorthan had constructed an elegant crystalline array that could focus stellar energy into devastating beams capable of punching through neutron star hulls. Their weapon was a masterpiece of mathematical precision, every angle calculated to the thousandth of a degree and every energy pathway optimized for maximum efficiency. The Krill had assembled a perfectly coordinated swarm of micro-projectiles, guided by quantum entanglement, each one capable of independent targeting while maintaining perfect coordination with thousands of others. Their weapon represented the pinnacle of collective intelligence applied to destructive engineering, a symphony of controlled violence that would overwhelm any defense through pure coordinated firepower. The Nereid had created a pressure wave generator that could manipulate matter at the subatomic level, creating crushing forces that would implode enemy vessels from the inside out, while leaving their own ships completely unaffected. Their device was elegant in its simplicity, beautiful in its function, and terrifying in its potential for destruction. All of these weapons were masterpieces that would have been celebrated as the greatest achievements of their respective civilizations. The humans had built something that looked like it had been designed by a committee of mad scientists during a severe caffeine overdose. Commander Thane approached the human workspace once again, drawn by readings that made his instruments question their own existence. Cadets, you have 17 hours remaining until the final demonstration. Are you confident in your weapons' capabilities? The 5 humans looked at each other, then at their chaotic creation that was now humming contentedly while several components pulsed with warm light, then back at their commander. David sipped his coffee from a cup that was somehow connected to the machine's power grid and considered the question seriously. Confident is probably too strong a word, Tom said diplomatically, his engineering background making him naturally cautious about overstatement. We're optimistic that when we activate the primary sequence, something impressively destructive will happen to whatever we're pointing it at. And if your optimism proves unfounded? Thane asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Anna shrugged with the casual attitude of someone who had already accepted that conventional wisdom might not apply to their situation. Then we'll probably learn something really interesting about dimensional physics right before we accidentally create a localized reality failure that erases us from existence. The machine suddenly emitted a series of harmonious chimes, like a massive wind instrument being played by someone who understood music theory but had never heard of conventional scales. Several components that had been glowing with chaotic energy patterns suddenly synchronized their output, creating something that resembled order if you squinted and didn't think too hard about what you were seeing. "Wait," Lucy said, staring at her instruments with the expression of someone who had just discovered that gravity was optional. "The resonance frequencies are stabilizing across all dimensional interfaces. The probability matrices are converging on a stable solution set." Ben's head emerged from inside the machine, his face bright with excitement. "The quantum entanglement field is maintaining coherence even though we're channeling energy from 17 different sources that should be interfering with each other destructively. This is actually working." "Define working," Commander Thane said, though his instruments were showing readings that suggested the humans had accidentally stumbled onto something that conventional physics would need several centuries to properly explain. Anna checked her calculations for the 100th time, running diagnostics on systems that shouldn't exist according to established scientific principles. "We're maintaining a stable dimensional breach that's contained within a localized gravity, while channeling enough energy to fold space-time into geometric configurations that don't technically exist in normal reality. That's completely impossible," Thane replied automatically, though his tone lacked conviction. "Yeah, we know," David said cheerfully, pouring himself another cup of coffee from the machine that was somehow integral to their weapons targeting system. "But we asked reality very politely if it could bend the rules just this once, and apparently it said yes." The other teams had stopped their work entirely to observe the human project. Never in Academy history had anyone created a weapon that seemed to function through negotiated physics rather than applied science. The concept that fundamental forces might be willing to compromise was revolutionary, terrifying, and somehow uniquely human in its approach. The Vorthan science officer approached with crystalline features reflecting bewilderment and grudging respect. "How did you determine the correct resonance frequencies for dimensional manipulation without spending decades in theoretical study?" "We didn't," Ben admitted. "We just tried different combinations until something started working, then kept adjusting until it worked better." "That's not scientific method," the Krill representative buzzed through their translator. "Maybe not your scientific method," Tom replied. "But human engineering tends to be more collaborative improvisation with a healthy disregard for what's supposed to be impossible." The machine chimed again, and this time the sound carried harmonics that seemed to make everyone feel slightly more optimistic about the universe's general willingness to cooperate with ambitious projects. The examination hall filled with spectators as teams prepared for final demonstrations against holographic Howler dreadnoughts that had been programmed with every tactical advantage their real counterparts possessed. Academy instructors from dozens of species gathered to witness which cadets would join the ranks of galactic defenders, and which would return to their homeworlds with valuable experience but no commission. The air hummed with tension and the subtle energy discharges from 4 very different weapons that represented the pinnacle of their builders' capabilities. The Vorthan team positioned their photon lance with mathematical precision, every component aligned according to crystalline energy focusing principles that had taken their civilization millennia to perfect. Their weapon gleamed like captured starlight, elegant curves channeling power through pathways calculated to the exact fraction of a degree. When activated, it would slice through enemy armor with surgical precision, systematically destroying critical systems until nothing remained but drifting debris. Commander Thane announced the beginning of demonstrations with formal ceremony that honored 3 centuries of Academy tradition. Teams will engage the holographic target using weapons of their own design and construction. Success is measured by complete neutralization of the simulated Howler dreadnought within acceptable time parameters. The Vorthan cadets activated their lance with quiet confidence. Brilliant beams of concentrated stellar energy lanced across the examination hall, carving through the holographic dreadnought's armor like heated knives through soft metal. Each strike was perfectly calculated, targeting weapon systems, propulsion units, and command centers with methodical efficiency. Within minutes, the simulation collapsed into scattered fragments that flickered and disappeared. Academy instructors nodded with approval. The demonstration had been textbook perfect, showing exactly the kind of precise application of overwhelming force that had made the Vorthon military legendary throughout the galaxy. Their weapon would be studied and refined, eventually becoming another tool in the arsenal of civilized species defending against Howler aggression. The Krill Collective activated their swarm weapons next, releasing thousands of micro-projectiles that moved with perfect coordination through shared hive mind consciousness. Each projectile could think independently while maintaining perfect synchronization with its companions, creating a cloud of intelligent destruction that adapted to enemy defenses in real time. The holographic dreadnought's point defense systems engaged desperately, but were quickly overwhelmed by sheer numbers and tactical coordination. The swarm enveloped the simulation like metallic insects, each projectile finding weak points in armor and exploiting them with devastating efficiency. The dreadnought's hull buckled under concentrated fire from thousands of precisely aimed impacts, and within moments the entire structure imploded as critical support systems failed simultaneously. Another perfect demonstration of advanced military engineering applied with mathematical precision. The Nereid team activated their pressure cannon with fluid grace, manipulating water molecules at the subatomic level to create crushing forces that propagated through the simulation's hull like invisible hammers. Their weapon operated on principles that few other species fully understood, using oceanic physics to generate pressure waves that could implode matter from the inside out while leaving the surrounding space completely undisturbed. The holographic dreadnought shuddered as molecular bonds began failing throughout its structure. Bulkheads collapsed inward as pressure differentials created by the Nereid weapon exceeded the structural limits of even Howler engineering. The simulation crumpled like paper being crushed by an invisible fist, its hull compacting into a dense sphere before disappearing entirely. The demonstration was elegant, efficient, and absolutely devastating. 3 perfect weapons, 3 flawless demonstrations, 3 teams that had proven themselves worthy of defending galactic civilization. Academy instructors made notes and prepared their evaluations while spectators murmured appreciatively at the display of advanced engineering and tactical thinking. Then came the humans' turn. Their machine had been wheeled into position, and under the examination hall's bright lights it looked even more chaotic than usual. Components that should never have been connected worked together through principles that made conventional physics uncomfortable. The coffee maker gleamed proudly from its position within what appeared to be the targeting system, while cables snaked between fusion reactors that hummed with harmonious frequencies nobody could properly explain. "Cadets, you may begin when ready," Commander Thane announced, though his voice carried uncertainty about what exactly was about to happen. Tom looked at his teammates with the casual confidence of someone who had already accepted that conventional wisdom probably didn't apply to their situation. "Everyone remember their assigned tasks? Press the big red button when you give the signal," Anna confirmed, her hand hovering over a control that looked like it had been salvaged from industrial equipment and repurposed for something completely different. "Keep the coffee maker running at optimal temperature," Lucy added, checking readings on an instrument panel that glowed with warm light and occasionally made pleased humming sounds. "Try not to accidentally destroy the solar system or breach any dimensional barriers that might let in things we don't want to meet," Ben said, monitoring energy levels that fluctuated in patterns that resembled music more than scientific measurements. "Stand very still and look confident while trying not to think too hard about what we're actually doing," David concluded, sipping coffee from a cup that was somehow networked into the machine's operational systems. "Excellent," Tom said. "Activating primary sequence in 3, 2, 1. The machine didn't roar to life with dramatic energy displays or earth-shaking vibrations. Instead, it gently suggested to reality that perhaps things might be slightly different for just a moment, if that would be acceptable to everyone involved. The air around the weapon shimmered like heat distortion, and space itself seemed to pause and consider options it hadn't previously known were available. The holographic Howler Dreadnought, massive and intimidating with armor that had withstood the firepower of entire fleets, suddenly folded, not exploded, not disintegrated, not crushed or melted or torn apart by overwhelming force. It simply folded in on itself like an origami crane made of space-time, its three-dimensional structure compressing into increasingly complex geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. The process was quiet, gentle, and absolutely irreversible within seconds. The dreadnought had been transformed into something roughly the size of a marble that contained all of its original mass, compressed into a stable configuration that existed primarily in mathematical space. The marble-sized object then politely disappeared with a small popping sound, taking its problems elsewhere. The examination hall fell completely silent. Commander Thane stared at his instruments, which reported that the target had been successfully converted into a stable microsingularity that had then been transferred to a parallel dimension where it would spend eternity as a very confused geometric concept. His readings showed no energy expenditure beyond normal parameters, no dangerous radiation, and no side effects whatsoever. "How long did this weapon take you to complete?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom checked the chronometer on his wrist and grinned. 45 minutes and 17 seconds of actual construction time. We spent most of the 72 hours figuring out how to integrate the coffee maker properly. News of the human achievement spread through the academy like plasma fire through a damaged reactor core. Within hours, every instructor, administrator, and visiting dignitary had heard about the 5 cadets who had folded a Howler Dreadnought into geometric impossibility using a weapon that included a coffee maker as a critical component. The Academy's greatest minds immediately began attempting to understand how such a thing could be possible, and their efforts would consume the next several months of galactic scientific inquiry. Dr. Vale led the reverse engineering team, bringing together brilliant scientists from 12 different species to analyze the human weapon. The Vorthan Science Council spent weeks studying the dimensional breach mechanism, running calculations that consumed entire quantum computers without producing satisfactory explanations. The Krill Collective dedicated thousands of drone hours to understanding the energy cascade, sharing theories through their hive mind consciousness until even their collective intelligence admitted defeat. The Nereid Theoretical Physics Institute sent their most gifted minds to examine the space-time folding effect, but their oceanic mathematics proved inadequate to describe what the humans had accomplished. Every species approached the problem using their most advanced scientific methods, and every species discovered that conventional understanding was insufficient to explain the weapon's function. The calculations suggest this device should have created a quantum cascade failure that destroyed half the galaxy, Dr. Vale reported during a meeting of senior Academy staff. Instead, it performed exactly as intended with no detectable side effects, no radiation emissions, and no violations of conservation laws that we can measure. Commander Thane reviewed the human cadets' files once again, searching for clues about their background that might explain their unprecedented success. Tom had been a mechanical engineer working on fusion reactor maintenance before joining the military. Anna had studied theoretical physics at a university that specialized in wild speculation rather than practical application. Ben was a computer programmer who had spent years making incompatible systems work together through creative interpretation of technical specifications. Lucy had a background in industrial chemistry with a focus on making dangerous reactions behave safely. David had been a cook before enlisting, specializing in creating satisfying meals from whatever ingredients happened to be available. None of their backgrounds suggested they should be capable of revolutionary breakthroughs in dimensional physics or exotic matter engineering. Yet together, they had accomplished something that exceeded the capabilities of civilizations that had spent millennia perfecting their scientific understanding. "How did you know your weapon would function as designed?" Thane asked during their post-examination debriefing. "We didn't," Tom admitted with characteristic human honesty. But we figured if we made it complicated enough and included enough different energy sources, it would probably do something interesting when we turned it on. That's not how engineering works, Dr. Vale protested, his scientific sensibilities offended by the casual dismissal of proper methodology. Weapon systems require precise calculations, extensive testing, and mathematical proof of concept before implementation. Anna shrugged with the relaxed confidence of someone who had already proven that conventional wisdom wasn't necessarily correct. Maybe not how your engineering works, but human engineering tends to be more like collaborative improvisation with a healthy disregard for what's supposed to be impossible. Your weapon violated 17 fundamental laws of physics, Dr. Vale continued, consulting his analysis reports that grew longer every day as new impossibilities were discovered. Yeah, but it violated them very politely, Ben pointed out with a grin. We asked reality nicely if it could bend the rules just this once, and apparently it was willing to accommodate our request. Lucy leaned back in her chair and considered the question more seriously. I think the difference is that you spend decades trying to understand exactly how something works before you build it. We just built something that seemed like it might work and then figured out how to make it work better. But without understanding the underlying principles, how could you possibly predict the results? The Nereid representative asked, her aquatic mind struggling to comprehend such an approach to scientific advancement. We couldn't, David said cheerfully, pouring coffee from a pot that was somehow still connected to their weapon despite being in a different room. But humans are pretty good at adapting to unexpected results and making them work in our favor. Commander Thane was quiet for a long moment, processing implications that challenged everything he thought he knew about technological development. His species had spent millennia perfecting the art of precise, methodical advancement through careful planning and exhaustive testing. They had created wonders that were celebrated throughout the galaxy, but they had never created anything quite like what these 5 humans had accomplished in less than an hour of actual construction time. The Vorthan officer made a decision that would change Academy training forever. The Academy would like to offer all of you positions as instructors. Your approach to problem-solving might benefit our other students, and we believe the galaxy would be better defended if more officers understood human engineering principles. The 5 humans looked at each other, communicating through expressions and gestures that had developed during their months of working together as a team. Finally, Lucy spoke for all of them. Can we keep the coffee maker? Dr. Vale consulted his reports with resignation that bordered on acceptance. The coffee maker appears to be a critical component of the weapon system's targeting mechanism. We've conducted extensive analysis, and removing it causes a 17% decrease in dimensional stability and a complete failure of the space-time folding matrix. Then yes, Tom said, speaking for his team with a grin that suggested they were looking forward to the challenge. We'd be honored to teach at the Academy and help other species learn human approaches to impossible problems. As the human cadets settled into their new roles as instructors, word of their achievements spread throughout the galaxy like ripples across the surface of space itself. Humanity's reputation shifted overnight from primitive newcomers who had barely mastered spaceflight to unpredictable innovators who might accidentally solve your most impossible problems while making coffee and discussing lunch plans. The Academy established new courses in applied human engineering, collaborative improvisation, and creative disregard for established limitations. Students from dozens of species lined up to learn how humans approached problems that conventional wisdom declared unsolvable. And graduation rates improved dramatically as cadets learned to think beyond the boundaries of their traditional scientific education. The Howlers, when they eventually returned with their massive fleets and planet-cracking dreadnoughts, discovered that their supposedly invincible warships were now vulnerable to weapons that folded them into mathematical concepts, and politely asked them to exist somewhere else. The war that had raged for millennia ended not with epic battles or heroic sacrifices, but with enemy fleets being gently compressed into abstract geometric shapes and transferred to dimensions where they could contemplate their existence without threatening civilized worlds. Peace settlements were negotiated through diplomatic channels, and the Howlers eventually adapted to their new circumstances by becoming the galaxy's most innovative theoretical mathematicians. Their unique perspective on existing as geometric concepts proved invaluable for solving complex equations that had puzzled conventional scientists for centuries. In the Academy's halls, a new motto was inscribed beneath the traditional knowledge. Through discipline that had guided military education for 300 years. The edition read, "Sometimes the best solution is the one nobody thought to try because it seemed too crazy to work." And below that, in smaller text, "Coffee helps." The coffee maker was given its own medal, a special commendation for distinguished service to galactic defense, and its own maintenance schedule that was considered classified information by Academy security. Students would often pause during their studies to observe the machine that had helped end a galactic war, though none of them could explain exactly how a device designed to heat water and extract flavor from ground beans had become integral to folding enemy warships into alternate dimensions. Years later, when Academy historians compiled records of the most significant military innovations in galactic history, they would struggle to categorize the human achievement. Previous breakthroughs had been the result of decades or centuries of careful research, mathematical modeling, and systematic testing. The humans had created their superweapon through what could only be described as organized chaos guided by intuition and powered by caffeine. Other species began sending their most promising students to study human methods, hoping to unlock the secret of rapid innovation through collaborative improvisation. However, most alien cadets found the human approach deeply unsettling. The idea of building something without first understanding exactly how it would work violated their fundamental beliefs about proper scientific methodology. The few non-human students who successfully adapted to human engineering principles discovered that the key was not in copying human techniques, but in learning to think like humans. This meant accepting uncertainty as a starting point rather than an obstacle, treating impossible problems as interesting puzzles rather than insurmountable barriers, and maintaining optimism even when conventional wisdom suggested that failure was inevitable. Tom, Anna, Ben, Lucy, and David became legendary figures at the Academy, their names spoken with the same reverence as the great military innovators of previous centuries. Unlike those historical figures who had spent lifetimes perfecting single innovations, the humans continued creating impossible solutions to problems that nobody else had even considered attempting to solve. Their advanced classes regularly produced weapons, defensive systems, and tactical innovations that violated established scientific principles while working perfectly in practical applications. Students learned to negotiate with physics rather than simply obeying its laws, to improvise solutions from whatever materials were available, and to maintain confidence even when they had no idea what they were actually doing. The galaxy became a safer place not through the application of superior firepower or more sophisticated military technology, but through the uniquely human ability to find creative solutions to problems that everyone else considered hopeless. When new threats emerged from unexplored regions of space, the standard response was no longer to assemble committees of experts for years of careful study, but to ask the humans what they thought might work and then give them access to whatever materials they needed. The Academy's museum eventually dedicated an entire wing to human innovations, though visitors were warned that many of the displays were still technically impossible according to current scientific understanding. The centerpiece of the collection was the original Superweapon, still functional after all these years, still incorporating that coffee maker as a critical component, and still capable of folding enemy vessels into geometric shapes that existed primarily in mathematical space. Commander Thane, now promoted to Academy Director, would often stand before the human weapon and marvel at how 5 young cadets had changed the course of galactic history in 45 minutes. The device hummed quietly in its display case, occasionally emitting those harmonious chimes that seemed to make reality feel more optimistic about cooperating with ambitious projects. The inscription beneath the weapon read simply, "Built by Humans in 45 minutes and 17 seconds. Changed everything forever. Coffee was involved. Future generations of military officers would study those words and learn that sometimes the most profound achievements come not from following established procedures, but from having the courage to try something completely different and see what happens. The galaxy was grateful that humans had decided to use their unique talents for defense rather than conquest, though most species suspected that humans would probably have found some way to make conquest more interesting and collaborative anyway. After all, any species that could accidentally end a millennia-long war while perfecting coffee brewing techniques was clearly operating by rules that nobody else fully understood. And in the Academy's advanced engineering labs, the sound of students laughing, arguing, and improvising impossible solutions continued to echo through the corridors, ensuring that the next generation of defenders would be ready for whatever challenges the universe might present.